If I told you that a beekeeper from a small American town once saved thousands of soldiers on the battlefields of Europe, would you believe it? Not with weapons, but with honey. This is the story of Edward Carter, the man whose accidental invention helped hundreds of supply trucks move silently through Normandy, right in the heart of enemy territory. June 5, 1944. While Europe was drowning in the sounds of bombs and fire, in the plains of Nebraska, the morning began like any other. The sun rose early, its light glinting on the dew covering the grass. At the edge of the field stood rows of wooden bee hives, neatly aligned. No sirens, no smoke, only the hum of bees blending with the wind whispering through the willow trees. That morning, Edward L. Carter, 37 years old, stepped out from the small house behind the hive. He wore an old flannel shirt, dark work pants, and walked with a slight limp, the remnant of a knee injury from his years working in a machine shop. Carter was a third-generation beekeeper of Clay County, a quiet man, used to the stillness of nature. For over a decade, he had learned to understand bees, their rhythm, their labor, their patience. To him, the buzzing of wings was the sound of discipline, steady, precise, and never chaotic. When he lifted the lid of one hive, sunlight illuminated hundreds of bees moving in perfect circles. Carter watched them like a silent commander observing a tiny army. He tilted his head, listening to the steady vibration of their wings, then raised a wooden honey frame toward the light. The thick golden syrup gleamed, the only thing in those days that still held peace. From afar, another sound began to rise. Across the sky stretched a formation of B-17 bombers flying eastward. He watched until they disappeared beyond the trees. Most of the men inside were likely his age, only they were heading to war, while he was not. An old knee injury had excluded him from the draft. Carter stood silently for a moment, then turned back to his hives. "At least," he murmured, "it's still quiet here." That noon, a military supply truck pulled up at the farm gate. 3 soldiers in dark khaki uniforms stepped out, carrying a procurement list. The government needed honey to replace sugar, to make antiseptics, and for use in manufacturing materials. Carter helped them load the heavy metal cans onto the truck, the sweet smell of honey mixing with the scent of machine oil. A young soldier joked while writing in his logbook, "Who knows? Maybe your honey will end up on the battlefield." Carter smiled faintly and replied, "No one wins a war with honey." When the truck drove away, Carter leaned on the gate, watching the wind ripple gently across the grass under the sunlight. He had no idea that just 3 days later, the very honey he jokingly called bee spit would find its way into history. You see, the story of Edward Carter begins in silence, but behind that quiet man was a spirit no less resilient than any soldier on the front line. To understand that, we need to look deeper into the life of this beekeeper and the small but vital role that honey played in the immense logistics machine of World War II. Edward Carter was born in 1907 in Clay County, Nebraska. He grew up on his parents' small farm, 120 acres of land and a few beehives placed under old apple trees. His father treated beekeeping as a hobby, but for Edward, it was the most fascinating part of his childhood. He learned to observe a hive as a living machine. Each bee had its own duty, working with precision without needing commands. After his father passed away, Edward took over the farm. By 1940, he had expanded it to more than 300 hives, equivalent to around 18 million bees, an impressive number for a self-taught farmer. Each season, he harvested several tons of honey, enough to supply the surrounding towns. Like millions of other Midwestern farmers, his life completely changed after December 7, 1941, the day of Pearl Harbor. When the United States officially entered the war, everything in the economy shifted toward supporting the military. Men in the town enlisted one after another, and the machine shop switched to producing truck and aircraft parts. For Edward, the effects of war reached him through something seemingly small: sugar. The government began rationing refined sugar for civilians. Where an average American once consumed around 100 pounds per year, now they were allowed only about 26. Families turned to honey as an alternative. The military, meanwhile, realized that honey had far more uses than just as a sweetener. It was durable, required no refrigeration, and had natural antibacterial and antifungal properties. It could be shipped long distances, stored for months, and provided a quick energy source for soldiers on the front lines. Edward received a notice from the local agricultural board. Large-scale beekeepers were encouraged to increase production. Some were given subsidies for equipment. Others signed small contracts to supply honey to military depots. He joined the program without thinking much of it, simply seeing it as his way to contribute. But within the massive machinery of war, honey was being used in more ways than he could imagine. Military medical researchers were testing it in antiseptic dressings for wounds. Several internal reports described it as a temporary natural substitute, useful during the shortage of industrial oils and lubricants. Meanwhile, Edward stayed home. He had applied to enlist in 1942, but his old knee injury got him classified as 4F, unfit for service. His close friends had all gone to war. His younger brother was deployed to Europe in early 1943. At 36, Edward remained with his bees. At night, when he heard freight trains passing by, loaded with coal, steel, and armored vehicles, he felt like a small, detached cog in the vast machine. In September 1943, the government sent him his first official contract to supply 800 pounds of honey to a processing facility in Des Moines, Iowa. He followed every procedure: weighing, sealing, signing, and delivering. No one told him what the honey would be used for, and truthfully, he didn't intend to ask. Perhaps, like his bees, he was content doing his small part without. In a world consumed by war, Edward's hives continued as before, precise, tireless, unaware that they were quietly fueling an entire global machine. By spring of 1944, in Clay County, the war existed only through the morning newspaper and letters from Europe. But for Edward Carter, that quiet life began to feel heavier. In town, people joked that he was the wartime beekeeper, a harmless joke that still stung. At church every weekend, Carter often heard whispers behind his back. Everyone else goes to war, and he stays home collecting honey. He never reacted. He simply lowered his head, wiped his sticky hands on his trousers, and went back to work. One evening in early April, Carter received the first letter in months from his younger brother, now serving in France. The paper was crumpled, smudged with oil and dust. The handwriting was shaky, hurried, with only a few short lines. The last sentence read, "If you can send anything, send." Carter read that line over and over. He understood that staying warm on the battlefield wasn't just about temperature. It meant anything that could help them endure the cold wind, damp mud, and sleepless nights. At the farm, he had no blankets or special clothing to send, But he knew he had plenty of three things: honey, beeswax, and linseed oil. Natural materials that could repel water, stick well, and retain heat. The next night, when the wind blew hard, the old bee house door creaked sharply each time it slammed against the frame. Carter took some beeswax, old honey, and linseed oil from the storage shed, mixed them together, and smeared the blend over the hinges. The mixture was sticky and sweet, and the scent of honey spread throughout the shed. He didn't think much of it. He just wanted to sleep without hearing the annoying noise from the banging doors. The next morning, the door slid smoothly. The hinges no longer rusted. The mixture he had used the night before, honey, beeswax, and linseed oil, not only cleaned the rust, but also formed a thin, firm, lubricating layer without the smell of machine oil. He paused for a moment, observing it, then wondered silently, if it could make the door this quiet, could it also reduce the noise of a truck? That same week, a military supply truck stopped by the farm to collect honey. The driver, a logistics sergeant, looked exhausted, his face smeared with oil. When Carter complained about the noise from engines and squeaky hinges at night, he mentioned his new mixture. The sergeant laughed. "You want to put honey on army trucks?" Carter simply replied, "If it cuts the noise and hides the oil smell, maybe it's worth a try." The soldier looked at him, thought for a few. Carter scooped a small batch into an old metal can and sent it off with the truck. After that, he almost forgot about it. 2 weeks later, while he was collecting frames at the far end of the garden, he heard a truck stop at the gate. A man in a brown officer's coat stepped out, carrying a short written order. "We tested your compound on 3 trucks," he said. "The results were better than expected." The noise dropped, and the smell of oil almost disappeared. The trucks ran smoother. He handed Carter a small paper note, written in pencil. "Approved for field use. Designation, Compound 47A." Carter stood still, holding the paper in the wind. He didn't understand the technical meaning, only that something he had made was now officially approved for military use. For him, it was the first time his beekeeping, once thought meaningless, had become part of the war effort. My friends, we can understand it this way. Technically speaking, Carter's Compound 47A could be considered a natural anti-friction coating, combining the rust resistance of linseed oil with the adhesion of beeswax. When applied to metal, it formed a thin film that reduced vibration and absorbed sound, crucial factors in wartime mechanics. From a rusty hinge in a bee house, Carter had unintentionally opened a new direction in military logistics technology. In the summer of 1944, Carter turned the old shed behind his farm into a small workshop. He placed a copper pot over a coal stove, heating honey until it gently simmered, then added beeswax and linseed oil, stirring them together. The mixture thickened, turning dark brown with a faint, sweet aroma. In the corner, rows of metal cans were neatly arranged, each labeled by hand. 47A, Batch 6. Neighbors who passed by were curious, but no one knew exactly what Carter was doing. To them, he was just the odd farmer who kept working while the entire nation worried about the war. A few weeks later, Carter received an envelope from Europe. No sender's address, only a faint postal stamp. Inside was a short note, likely from a soldier who had tested Compound 47A. The first line read, "Applied on 5 trucks. Germans didn't hear. No casualties." At the bottom, another brief line, "Smells like Christmas." Carter read it several times, then set the letter on the table beside the cooled mixture. Only then did he realize that something he had created might have saved lives, even if it was just a thin layer on a set of wheels. Never before had the smell of burnt wax felt so moving to him. After that, he began adjusting the ratios: less honey, more wax, and longer heating time to make the compound thicker and more flexible. When he tested it on old metal scraps, he noticed the coating not only reduced squeaks, but also absorbed vibration. When the metals struck together, the sound was muffled, leaving only a dull thud. Carter wrote a note. 47B. Reduces sound transmission. He didn't know that, in technical terms, this was the principle of passive sound insulation, a concept later applied to armored vehicles. A month later, Carter received an urgent telegram from the supply department. Increase production by 100%. Ship to Liverpool. Priority for upcoming operation. He didn't ask why. He simply gathered all remaining honey, boiled it through the night, and inspected each batch before sealing the cans. During those nights, the sound of bees buzzing around the workshop blended with the hiss of metal and fire. A scene he would never forget. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, metal drums labeled 47A were opened in British camps. Soldiers brushed the dark brown compound onto wheel axles, hinges, and exhaust pipes. They gave it a new name: ghost grease, the grease of ghosts, the substance that let trucks move without a sound. Normandy, June 1944. In the chaos following the landings, motor convoys had to move at night, over muddy roads. The sound of metal alone was enough to destroy the element of surprise. But that night, many Allied convoys passed silently through the forest. No screeching, no glint of headlights. They heard only the wind and the distant waves. In several units, soldiers spoke of a new kind of grease, the honey from Nebraska. In a war where sound could mean life or death, silence itself became a revolutionary weapon. From the sweetness of honey, Carter had unintentionally created a tool that helped conceal hundreds of vehicles in the darkness of Normandy. But the true test of the ghost grease did not happen in Normandy. It came at Falaise Gap, where the war pushed silence to its final limit. August 1944, Falaise, a hilly region in northern France. At that time, German forces were trapped in a narrow pocket between two converging Allied offensives. Around 50,000 German soldiers were cornered, desperately trying to retreat through the only remaining road. If they escaped, the war in Europe could have dragged on for months. To stop them, the Allies had to send hundreds of supply trucks, carrying ammunition, fuel, and medicine across open ground before dawn. And to do that, they had to move in absolute silence. To reach the front line, the convoys had to cross 20 kilometers of dirt roads, dangerously close to German patrol zones. A single sound, the squeal of a wheel, the creak of a hinge, could give away their position. The order was clear: move without a sound. That night, 212 trucks, 38 jeeps, and 12 half-tracks were coated with a compound called 47A. For nearly 6 hours, mechanics worked non-stop. Some stirred, some brushed, some inspected. The thick, dark brown mixture was spread onto wheel axles, hinges, and exhaust pipes, anywhere metal could make noise. None of the soldiers knew that this strange grease came from a small farm in Nebraska. Among the drivers was Sergeant Thomas Carter, 27 years old, Edward's younger brother. He sat behind the wheel of a 2-ton GMC truck, its hood still faintly waxed. Thomas didn't know the grease on his vehicle was made of honey, beeswax, and linseed oil, nor that its creator was his brother, the man kept home by a knee injury. That night, at 2 a.m., The convoy began to move. No headlights, no radios. Only the faint light of distant flares reflecting through a thin mist. The wheels rolled over damp earth without a sound. Even when the drivers shifted gears, the usual metallic grind was reduced to a soft murmur. An officer at the rear, less than a kilometer away, German scouts manned watchposts along the road, but detected nothing. No radar, no sound, only darkness and wind. The convoy passed quietly through the danger zone, in groups of 5 trucks spaced a few minutes apart. By around 3 a.m., when the first trucks reached the wooden bridge over the Dives River, the wind shifted, carrying the fading echo of gunfire. As the last truck crossed, the first German flare streaked across the sky, only minutes too late. Shells fell behind them. 3 trucks were hit by shrapnel, 8 soldiers wounded. No one died. 198 trucks made it across safely, carrying over 100 tons of ammunition and fuel to the front lines. 2 weeks later, a thin envelope arrived in Nebraska. The sender was Thomas Carter. The handwriting was short and firm. We rolled in silence. I survived. That evening, Edward Carter opened one of his hives in the yard. Thousands of bees swarmed out, their wings glimmering under the yellow light. He smiled softly and said, "Good work, ladies." 1945. The war ended. Soldiers returned home. Factories stopped producing weapons. America entered a quieter age after years of turmoil. In Nebraska, Edward Carter remained, on the same farm, surrounded by endless fields. There was no medal bearing his name. In a logistics report hundreds of pages long, only one short line remained. 47A compound, slight noise reduction. Source: civilian manufacturer, Nebraska. Carter rarely spoke about the war. He repainted the bee house, divided the hives, and repaired the old fences. Life slowly returned to what it once was. Mornings checking the hives, evenings closing them, nights recording the yields. Sometimes he received thank you letters from soldiers who had been at Normandy, but over time even those stopped coming. One late autumn afternoon, Thomas visited. The 2 brothers sat on the porch, looking out over the harvested fields. Thomas said, "I heard they're testing your compound on submarines." Carter laughed and replied, "Who knows? Maybe I'll sink a U-boat next." They fell silent. Only the buzzing of bees around the sunlit frames broke the stillness, the familiar sound Carter had heard all his life. Years later, after he had passed away, a child from the town wandered into his old shed. Amid the rusty tools, the boy found a cracked glass jar. Inside was a hardened layer of honey, amber in color. Stuck to the bottom was an old piece of paper, the ink almost gone. Compound 47A. Remember the silence. The child held the jar up, and the afternoon light shone through the honey, casting a soft golden glow on the wall. In the shed it was silent, so silent that only the wind slipping through the tin roof could be heard. A different kind of silence, deeper, longer, still lingered there, among the things he left behind. If you believe that history is not only written in explosions, but also in moments of silence like this, share this story so more people will know that sometimes even a small idea can save hundreds of lives. And if you wish to hear more untold stories of war, don't forget to subscribe so we can meet again